Good afternoon, colleagues. Chair, as I communicated to you in the letter requesting that you call this meeting, I mentioned that at the February 27th meeting of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, provided clear and convincing testimony that there was sustained, inappropriate, and unethical pressure on her. She testified these events involved 11 people, excluding herself and her political staff, from the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, and the office of the Minister of Finance. This included in-person conversations, telephone calls, emails, and text messages. She also testified that while she couldn't discuss why she resigned as Veteran Affairs Minister, or in fact anything else that was said or happened after she was replaced as Attorney General, unless she was cleared to do so by another order in council, she had more to say. Now, Liberal members of the Justice Committee denied her that opportunity at the March 19th closed-door meeting when they voted to prematurely shut down their incomplete study. I believe, and I hope it's shared by members on both sides of the table, that it is entirely proper, entirely appropriate for this House Standing Committee on Ethics to examine the incomplete evidence and the many issues raised by Ms. Wilson-Raybould that are fully within the purview of this committee's mandate to investigate matters as they pertain to ethics. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the committee interfere with the narrow investigation that the Ethics Commissioner announced in his February 11th letter. As you'll recall, Commissioner Dion disagreed with a request that he undertake an investigation of the Prime Minister under Section 7 of the Conflict of Interest Act, which prohibits a public office holder from giving preferential treatment to any person or organization. But the Commissioner did find reason to act. He said, quote, "I have reason to believe that a possible contravention of Section 9 may have occurred." Section 9, of course, prohibits a public office holder from seeking to influence a decision of another person so as to improperly further another person's private interests. And the Commissioner concluded in that letter that he has initiated an examination under subsection 45(1) of the Conflict of Interest Act. But as I communicated to the chair in requesting this meeting, there is a wide range of issues across the ethics spectrum, that are left unexamined in the prematurely closed Justice Committee study. I believe Canadians deserve to hear the full truth. It's unacceptable that our Liberal colleagues, the majority on the Justice Committee, clearly acting on directions from the Prime Minister's office, decided they didn't want to hear any more from the former Attorney General or any of the 9 other individuals implicated in the sustained pressure allegations made by the former Attorney General. There remain many unanswered questions related to the former Attorney General's resignation from Cabinet, the presentation she gave to Cabinet after her resignation, and the discussion she had after being replaced as Attorney General. I thank you, Chair, for your confirmation in the House last week that an investigation by this committee, the Ethics Committee, is or would be in order. I hope that Liberal members of the committee agree and will exercise the independence that the Prime Minister claims all committee members enjoy. I sincerely hope that we will see a manifestation of that independence in agreement today, that we study elements of the deeply troubling affair blocked by Liberal members of the Justice Committee. And as a first step, I wish to move the following motion: that given the public statement on March 14th by Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould that this matter is serious and some questions remain unanswered, and given the public statement of March 21st by Ms. Jane Philpott that there is much more to this story that needs to be told, the committee A, immediately begin a study of the ongoing corruption scandal involving the Prime Minister. B, instruct the chair to write to the Prime Minister requesting that he waive all constraints that may prevent individuals invited to appear before the committee from speaking freely. C, invite Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould to appear as a witness in this study no later than April 5th. D, invite Ms. Jane Philpott to appear as a witness in this study no later than April 5th. And E, that upon conclusion of this study, a report of the findings of this committee be tabled in Parliament. Now, the Prime Minister has deflected questions of formally allowing Ms. Wilson-Raybould to speak. He cites an unprecedented waiver already, and of course it was an unprecedented waiver to address an unprecedented scandal, but it doesn't extend far enough, as my motion specifies. He should make it official, and he should remove all constraints, first on her and any other witnesses that may be called to appear before committee. Now, why does this matter, Mr. Chair? And because this is a new issue before this committee, I would like to put onto the record some of the relevant facts supporting the motion that's before us. It matters because Canada is a nation founded on the rule of law. Who one knows in the PMO should not get one special favors. On March 8th, in a case related to this matter, the federal court ruled the independence of the Attorney General is essential and fundamental to the criminal justice system. 5 former attorneys general across partisan lines wrote to the RCMP commissioner to express concern that a crime has been committed. Retired Judge Mary Ellen Turpin-Lafond described the ongoing scandal as a constitutional crisis. The head of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and former Ontario Liberal Attorney General Michael Bryant said, "A lot of police officers have laid a lot of obstruction of justice charges on a lot of ordinary Canadians with a lot less evidence than this." I will remind the committee, those that might not have viewed Ms. Wilson-Raybould's original testimony before the Justice Committee, of some of the things that she said. Quote, "For a period of approximately 4 months between September and December of 2018, I, Ms. Wilson-Raybould, experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion in my role, her role, as the Attorney General of Canada, in an inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin." Another quote, "The conversation that I had where they became very clearly inappropriate was when political issues came up, like the election in Quebec, like losing the election if SNC were to move their headquarters." She said as well, "There were express statements regarding the necessity of interference in the SNC-Lavalin matter, the potential of consequences and veiled threats if a deferred prosecution agreement was not made available to SNC." And Ms. Wilson-Raybould said, "I had determined that I was not going to issue a directive. It was inappropriate to interfere with the discretion of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and having made up my mind, her mind, taking into account all of the information again, for those who know me," she said, "I was not going to change my mind." There were other quotes, again, in her testimony. She said, for example, quoting the former Principal Secretary in the Prime Minister's office, Gerald Butts, saying, "There is no solution that doesn't involve some interference." She said that, in quoting Katie Telford in the Prime Minister's office, "We don't want to debate legalities anymore." She testified that she spoke to Minister Morneau on this matter. "I told him," she said, "that engagements from his office to mine on SNC had to stop, that they were inappropriate. They did not stop." She said, and I quote, PMO advisor Matthew Bouchard said, "We can have the best policy in the world, but we need to be re-elected." Now, Mr. Speaker, we have seen on numerous occasions in the past almost 2 months now, the Prime Minister change the story, to change the excuses that he offers for why there was what he considers to be appropriate interference, which the former Attorney General rejected as inappropriate. The Prime Minister has claimed thousands of jobs were at risk if SNC-Lavalin were to be convicted. This was debunked by academics, and it was widely panned as a naive assumption at best, or a falsehood or manipulation at worst. And of course, we heard from SNC-Lavalin's Chief Executive Officer, Neil Bruce, that the suggestion of 9,000 jobs could disappear if SNC is blocked from a deferred prosecution agreement. He said, that's incorrect, and we've never said that. Now, is there more information, in fact, for this committee to hear on the matter? Well, on March 14th, Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould said, this matter is serious. Some questions remain unanswered. On March 21st, Ms. Jane Philpott said that, quote, there is much more to this story that needs to be told. And she said, I believe the former Attorney General has further points to make. I believe that I have further issues of concern that I am not free to share. Now, we know that the story has changed many times, as I said, over the past almost 2 months. The most recent and I think disgusting act of desperation from the Prime Minister's office, or from someone who at one point was in the Prime Minister's office, came out yesterday with a leak of highly sensitive, confidential information, smearing a highly respected member of the judiciary in an attempt to distract from the Prime Minister's attempted interference in a criminal trial and a cover-up of that attempted interference. We heard from the Chief Justice of the Manitoba Court of Queen's Bench regretfully being forced to come forward to make a statement, having been drawn into this sorry affair, to say, and I quote, I fear someone is using my previous candidacy to Supreme Court to further an agenda unrelated to the appointment process. And Chair and colleagues, this breach of the confidentiality of what is supposed to be a highly confidential judicial appointment process is serious enough to require an investigation on its own. But it is part of this, and it is included in, again, the widely changing, continually changing story of from the Prime Minister. This sort of leak, we've been told again by experts in law in the past couple of days, that this sort of leak could compromise the integrity of judicial appointment process. It could compromise the integrity of institutions, and potentially could compromise the integrity of sitting justices. Now, I'm sure that my Liberal colleagues, and I respect them, we've worked well together on a number of difficult issues in the past couple of years in creating studies within the broad purview of our ethics committee's various mandates. I know they've heard, I certainly have, from my constituents about concerns, and I'm sure that they will continue to hear from their constituents, as I expect I will, until all of the facts are out, until this matter is resolved. And Chair, just to wrap up my first intervention, I must say, and I compliment the Liberal Vice Chair of this committee in his op-ed commentary today in a Toronto newspaper, where he said, outside of 3 categories of whipped votes, a member of Parliament should be free to register their disagreement with the Liberal government on matters of policy and principle, and to remain in the Liberal caucus. He said, and again, I would advise all to read the complete op-ed, but in the interest of time, I will simply go to 2 further quotes. But Mr. Erskine Smith wrote, our responsibility is to ensure that our legislative decisions are reflective of our collective obligations to the Liberal Party, but to our constituents, to the evidence, and to the public interest. South of the border, Mr. Erskine Smith wrote, we can see the ongoing damage wrought when representatives put party before country, and we should work to avoid similar outcomes here at home. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up, we have a speaking order. Next up for the second motion of the day, Ms. Ramsey.
I'd actually like to speak to this motion. And, the NDP has been committed to getting to the truth on this. And I think that's been clear throughout our efforts throughout this entire thing. And this is why we've repeatedly called for a public independent inquiry, is because what happened at the Justice Committee and what we've seen happening at the Ethics Commissioner, which is beyond the scope, to be quite frank, of what the Ethics Commissioner can do. We believe that to get to the truth, we need a public, independent inquiry. And we're using all the tools that we can to get to the truth. We participated in the Justice Committee. I sat at the Justice Committee process. We called for the Ethics Commissioner to investigate, and now we're here supporting this motion at the Ethics Committee. It's obvious to us and to Canadians that the Liberals are using their power to silence the former Attorney General and the former President of the Treasury Board. For some reason, Mr. Chair, Liberals do not want this story to be heard. And, I've heard it repeated by my Liberal colleagues here and others throughout their party that Ms. Wilson-Raybould has already had her opportunity. I've heard them say that she's had 4 hours to have her say, and that's good enough for them. They've actually made
I'm just
going
to clarify something as chair. Is we have one motion on
Yes.
the table, so that you're speaking to that. So we'll
Yes.
have to vote on that first, and then your motion can come after that. Just to be clear.
Okay, I'm going to move an amendment at the end of my...
Go ahead. So you're still speaking to Mr. Kent's
I am,
motion,
yes.
correct?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we've heard these lines repeated that Ms. Wilson-Raybould had 4 hours to have her say, and that's good enough. Now, Liberals have made up their mind. They think that everything she's had to say is out, which we know isn't true, because we know she herself, Ms. Wilson-Raybould, has said both publicly and in writing that she has more to say. And now Ms. Philpott, in her article in Maclean's last week, indicated she also has some things to contribute to this conversation. And Canadians want to hear what they have to say. I think that this isn't good enough for Canadians. And every place that I go in my riding of Essex and my New Democrat colleagues, people are talking about this. To think that this is just somehow an Ottawa bubble story and no one's paying attention to it because it's too difficult to understand all of the moving pieces in this, which, I frankly understand because it's been changing every single day, this story. But people are talking about it. I went to the post office, a lady was talking to me about it in there. She knew Jody Wilson-Raybould's name and Miss Philpott's name and was using it and saying, we want them to speak the truth. I was in airport security yesterday to come here, and the screener was talking to me about this. They want these women to come and speak. People who typically don't pay attention to politics are gripped by this story. And to see the budget come and go and no one even be talking about the budget tells us that Canadians are not ready to let this story go. And I think the motion that's being brought before us today is about getting to the truth. So we're willing to use all the tools that are available. And I think if the Prime Minister at this point won't do the right thing and expand this waiver, which is what's being asked, to expand the scope of the order in council, then we have to have a full public inquiry. And he has to let these former cabinet ministers at the very least speak because of the indication that they've given that they would like to and that they have something substantive to contribute to this story. When Jane Philpott last week said that there's much more to the SNC-Lavalin affair and Canadians have concerns about the government's attempts to shut down the story, that rings true to me. And I can tell from the op-ed this morning that my colleague, Mr. Erickson-Smith, feels the same way, that that's ringing true, that people are talking about this, that people want the truth, and that as elected officials, that's actually the obligation that we have. Our obligation isn't to the party that we represent. It's actually to those constituents and to Canadians as a whole when we're sitting at this committee space. So I want to talk a little bit about the Justice Committee and what happened there. And, a lot of people told us that they felt that that was the best place for the study, for the truth, for everything to come out at the Justice Committee. But the Liberals were quite clear that they had no desire to see that happen at the Justice Committee. They used every tool available to them to shut down the debate, to shut down the conversation, to essentially end the study. We don't have an ongoing study anymore at the Justice Committee to get to the bottom of this. And that's concerning because this isn't just about Canada. The OECD is watching what we're doing here, and our minister had to provide them, a letter saying, yes, we will have, robust investigation that will happen at the Justice Committee. Well, that's no longer happening. So what is the answer or the response to the Globe right now about us trying to, pull our own weight and really stick with our international commitments that we've made, not just in words, but in writing, something that's a standard that we're held to, and we can't just skate away from that. So the Ethics Committee is another opportunity for a study to happen, I think, that would satisfy the global community and let them know that our commitments are serious and that we take them seriously. So the Justice Committee, you know, the Liberal majority, in my opinion, did not act in good faith at that committee. They did not. We moved 3 motions for the NDP to have Jody Wilson-Raybould testify again on February 27th, March 6th, March 13th, and they were consistently voted down and ignored. So this is another opportunity, I think, for Liberals to understand that this isn't a story that's going away. Canadians want the truth, and so this is another opportunity to get to that truth. Ms. Wilson-Raybould was repeatedly denied the opportunity to return to the Justice Committee, even though we saw the former Privy Council clerk, Michael Wernick, come back, and he refuted the testimony that she had given. Fundamentally, that's unfair. She has a right of reply. That's just a fundamental unfairness that she was not able to come back and address the comments that were made about her. And I hope that her colleagues who sit on this committee see that for the injustice that it was, and that she deserves a right to be able to speak to what was said about her. And we moved motions to hear from everyone that was implicated in her testimony, and these were consistently voted down. And we heard from 3 people out of 11. There are still other players that were named that are involved in this that need the opportunity to come forward and speak, and quite frankly, clear their own names, because some pretty incriminating things were said about them. So I'm sure that those people do not want this to follow their career either, and would welcome the opportunity to come and sit before this committee now to be able to air the truth. And, you know, I'm talking about, you know, people who are sitting at the highest level. We're talking about 4 resignations, but we're talking about the former Attorney General's Chief of Staff. We're talking about the current Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. We're talking about 2 PMO staff members who are still sitting there. I would imagine that they would like the opportunity to come before the committee, and I hope you'll extend that to them, because as at the bare minimum in terms of fairness and a courtesy, I think that they deserve that as well. So what happened? We saw what happened. They voted to shut down debate. They adjourned the debate. And, you know, again, last week they shut down the entire study. So now there's nothing to happen at the Justice Committee, although we saw this letter come from Ms. Wilson-Raybould to the Justice Committee last week. That was in direct response to questions that were asked by Mr. Rankin during her testimony. So she will provide some of the documents and the text messages that were requested of her. She alluded to a report in her letter. There is no such report. There's no report to come from the Justice Committee, because the Liberal members on the Justice Committee have shut any opportunity for that down. So there's nothing going forward there. And again, we have to understand that Ms. Wilson-Raybould, you know, will only be addressing those direct questions that were asked of her in her response. But the question I think that's outstanding is why the Liberal members on that committee did not want to get to the truth. And so I hope that the Liberal members on this committee, who do hold the majority here, are really seriously considering what has been happening around our country, and the fact that this isn't going away. Every single day there's a new bombshell that's coming out in this. And the best path for all of us is to go to the truth. When the truth comes out, then we can deal with the fallout of that. But as long as you continue to block, and I really sincerely hope that won't be the case here today, that there won't be a movement to adjourn, there won't be a movement to go in camera, that there won't be an attempt to once again put things behind closed doors that Canadians are strongly indicating they do not want to see. I want to address a comment that was made, and it's been a theme, a very horrible theme, I think, of this entire thing, and it's been the attempt to smear these very credible, intelligent women. We saw certainly a smear campaign against Ms. Wilson-Raybould that continued yesterday, to be honest, in this debacle of, you know, somehow, again, this frame that she's difficult, that she was, you know, difficult to work with. If she's so difficult to work with, then why was the Prime Minister offering her the Indigenous file, which by his own admission is the most important relationship that exists? So, you know, this doesn't hold water, that she's difficult, but we're going to give her the best file, the most important file that we have. You know, this doesn't add up, and Canadians can see through these attempts. But what Ms. Sgro said shocked people, I think, on the weekend, when she said that she wanted Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Ms. Philpott to put up or shut up. First of all, I don't know who speaks to their colleagues that way. I can tell you that my colleagues in the New Democratic Party would never speak to me in that manner. That's misogynistic, that's sexist, and coming from a woman, a senior woman, is even more shocking. I hope that you'll address this issue with your colleague. She needs to issue an apology. And I don't think an apology just to the people that she's discussing it, it's to women parliamentarians. We have 26% women sitting in this parliament, and how on earth are we going to attract strong, intelligent women to this parliament if the message is, if you don't go along with your party, if you don't protect the prime minister, then you better shut up. Because the interpretation of this that I got wasn't put up or shut up, it was shut up or we'll find a way to shut you up. And women in Canada will not tolerate that. So I do hope you'll address that with your colleague, and I hope that she'll actually retract that statement and understand the impact that it has on young women who are going to be filling our parliament in another week and the daughters of the vote. So I implore you as colleagues to please address that issue within your caucus and with Ms. Sgro directly. But these comments, really, I think speak to Canadians that the Liberals are more interested in protecting the Prime Minister than finding the truth. And your political future, my political future, is not more important than the truth. And I think this is what Mr. Erskine-Smith wrote in his op-ed today, is basically that we are here to get to the truth. We are not here to serve the parties that we're in. We can disagree with the parties that we're in. We can do so in a respectful way. We can do so in a way that's in line with our party values. But when we try to block the truth from Canadians and block our colleagues from being able to speak that truth, there's something fundamentally wrong there. And so I really implore you today to support this. And I think also, I mentioned this at the Justice Committee last week, that the Liberal Party campaigned on transparency and accountability. This is not transparency and accountability. And you can't continue to say one thing and do another, because it's just putting a lot of doubt in Canadians' minds about what is happening here. And we're talking about, the Prime Minister's office, corporations having access to the Prime Minister's office, being able to write laws, and then when they can't use those laws, the Prime Minister using his power to pressure the one person who can change their mind to do so. This is serious, and Canadians understand this. And I think it would be a grave mistake for Liberal members to think that Canadians don't understand what this is all about. This is actually the fear that Canadians have. When a constituent walks through my office and they're being sent, a refusal for EI because they wrote one thing wrong in their application, that's not fair. And so they're coming to me to help them. So how do I then turn around and say to those constituents, well, guess what? There are different rules that apply for you and that apply to the Prime Minister of Canada. And that's the message that you're sending to Canadians. You have to do all the right things. You can't even, breach anything or be in view of breaching anything, or you'll be prevented from receiving the services that are owed to you when you have the Prime Minister who's doing the exact opposite. So I really implore you to take that seriously, because that's what Canadians are paying attention to. And I want to talk about the oath, because there's been a lot of discussion about the oath that Jody Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott took. And, there's been a lot of speculation. Well, they could stand up in Parliament. They could, have parliamentary privilege. You're asking them to take an incredible risk on something that hasn't been tested to that length, to be quite honest. And these are professional, intelligent, strong women, and I don't blame them for not wanting to take that risk that they'll wear for the rest of their lives. And I think it's actually disgraceful that you're asking them to do that. There's one person who can change this. And, well, first I'll get back to the oath, because I want to read this section of the oath. And the reason why I think we heard Ms. Philpott say she's taking it seriously, the reason why I think Jody Wilson-Raybould is taking it so seriously, and I'll read this one section. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for Her Majesty, so help me God. So this line is something that they take incredibly seriously, and you're asking them to break that. I'm asking you, and New Democrats are asking you, to go to your Prime Minister and have him, with a stroke of a pen, he could do it right now, he could do it right after this meeting, expand the order in council. Lift the waiver and let them say what they want to say, what they've indicated strongly they want to. Why are you asking them to jeopardize themselves, to jeopardize their careers, to jeopardize their oath, to potentially be under some type of, legal case following them standing up. I don't understand that. I really don't. And again, as a colleague, I don't know how you impose that on your own colleague in your own caucus to say, I'm going to prevent you from speaking the truth. I will not go to the Prime Minister and say that. I can't comprehend that. And I think it's very unfortunate. And I do believe that there are a lot of Liberal members who don't believe that that's the proper path either. So, I really implore you in this particular motion around expanding the Order in Council to stop asking Jody Wilson-Raybould and stop asking Jane Philpott to break everything that they've said they cannot do, and to go back and do the one thing they're asking you to do, and that's to expand it so they can speak. It's so simple. It really is. And fundamentally, it's fair. And I think that Canadians understand that, and I think that all of you, I hope, understand that. So I think I'll leave it at that, but I would like to introduce my amendment at this point, Mr. Chair, if I can read it into the record. Yes? Okay, it's being distributed. I'll read it into the record. So the amendment is as follows: that Clause A of the motion be replaced with the following. A, immediately begin a study pursuant to Standing Order 108-3H6 to review any federal legislation, regulation, or standing order which impacts the ethical standards of public office holders as it relates to the question of exerting inappropriate pressure on the Attorney General of Canada for political or other reasons with respect to decisions regarding whether to proceed with a criminal prosecution, and that a vote on this motion be conducted while the committee is open to the public. So I think that this speaks to the mandate of this committee. And, there's been some confusion in the public about whether or not the Ethics Committee is the appropriate place, whether it's the mandate of this committee, which New Democrats feel strongly that it is. I think that moving this amendment offers some clarity. And I think the second half is talking about the vote being open to the public. Canadians have been clear that they don't support the efforts of this Liberal government to bring things behind closed doors and to keep them from Canadians. And I think that's the rationale that we're offering here in having the vote in public and being transparent to Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. We have Mr. Poilievre.